They told us to wear all black, follow the rules, and stay quiet. I didn't think much of it until I saw what was hidden behind those velvet curtains. When I was invited to work at Diddy's Black Party as a server, I couldn't believe my luck. It was the kind of exclusive, high-profile event you hear about on social media, but never think you'll actually experience. The agency told me it was a last-minute gig, but the pay was generous, and I'd be surrounded by celebrities all night. The rules, though, were strict. All staff were required to wear black. No exceptions. We weren't allowed to interact with guests unless spoken to, and under no circumstances were we to take photos or videos. At first, I chalked it up to maintaining privacy for high-profile attendees. But looking back, those rules weren't just about privacy. They were about control. The party took place at an estate on the outskirts of the city. I arrived just before sundown, passing through a massive wrought iron gate guarded by men in suits who didn't smile or make small talk. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces gleaming under the lights. Inside, the mansion was stunning. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the walls were adorned with abstract art that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. Guests were already mingling, their laughter and clinking glasses echoing through the grand hall. Everyone was dressed in black, as if the color itself was part of the event's identity. I was assigned to the dining room, where an extravagant buffet was set up. My job was simple: refill drinks, clear plates, and keep my head down. At first, everything felt normal. The guests were glamorous, the music was loud, and the atmosphere was electric. But as the night wore on, something started to feel off. It began with little things, the way the other staff avoided eye contact with the guests, as if afraid to be noticed. The hushed conversations that abruptly stopped whenever someone else walked by. And then there were the velvet curtains. In the far corner of the main hall, a pair of heavy black curtains hung from ceiling to floor. They didn't match the rest of the decor, and I hadn't noticed them during the pre-event briefing. Throughout the night, I saw a few people slip behind them, always escorted by one of the suited guards. None of them returned to the main hall. When I asked one of my co-workers about it, she shot me a warning glance. "Don't ask questions," she muttered before walking away. By midnight, the party had taken on a darker tone. The music had shifted to something slower and more hypnotic, the kind of sound that seemed to vibrate in your chest. The guests, too, seemed different, less celebratory and more intense. I was clearing glasses near the edge of the room when I overheard two guests talking in hushed tones. "Did you see the last one?" one of them asked. "Yeah," the other replied, lowering his voice even more. "They're not going to let that slide." I didn't understand what they were talking about, but the way they spoke sent a chill down my spine. At some point, one of the guards approached me. His expression was unreadable, but his tone was firm. "Come with me," he said. I followed him through the crowded room, past the buffet, and toward the velvet curtains. My heart raced as he pulled them aside, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled downward into the dark. "Go," he said. I hesitated. "Why?" He didn't answer, just stared at me until I started descending the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the muffled sounds of the party above faded into an eerie silence. At the bottom of the staircase was a long hallway lit by flickering candles. The walls were bare stone, and the air smelled damp and metallic. At the end of the hallway, I reached a heavy wooden door. It was slightly ajar, and I could hear faint murmurs coming from the other side. I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. The room was large and circular, with a high ceiling that seemed to amplify every sound. In the center was a table covered with a black cloth, and on it lay something or someone motionless. Around the table stood a group of people, their faces obscured by masks. They were chanting softly, their voices blending into a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. One of them turned slightly, and I recognized the silhouette immediately. It was Diddy. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The door creaked, and the chanting stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, footsteps, slow and deliberate, began approaching the door. I turned and ran. The hallway seemed longer than before, the flickering candlelight casting twisted shadows on the wall. I could hear voices behind me now, shouting, though I couldn't make out the words. My only thought was to get back to the main hall, back to the crowd, back to safety. When I reached the top of the stairs, the guard was gone. The party was still in full swing, the guests oblivious to what was happening below. I weaved through the crowd, trying to find an exit, but the front doors were locked, and the windows were sealed. One of the other staff members grabbed my arm. "What did you see?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," I whispered, though I knew that wasn't true. Before I could say more, the lights went out, the music stopped, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. In the darkness, I felt someone grab my arm and pull me toward the side of the room. "Stay quiet," a voice whispered. It was the coworker who had warned me earlier. She led me through a side door into what appeared to be a storage closet. "You shouldn't have gone down there," she said, her voice trembling. "What was that?" I asked, my own voice shaking. She didn't answer, just pressed her finger to her lips. We stayed there, huddled in silence for what felt like hours. Eventually, the sounds of the party resumed, but neither of us dared to move. When the doors finally opened at dawn, I slipped out with the departing guests, my heart pounding the entire way home. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, what I had seen, but who would believe me? It was Diddy's party after all, and some secrets aren't meant to stay buried. I didn't know how long we stayed in that cramped closet, but my coworker's trembling breath in the dark was the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. The muffled sound of the party beyond the walls was back, but it felt different now, forced, almost like someone wanted to make it seem as if nothing had happened. The smell of damp stone from the basement still clung to me, and my mind raced with what I'd seen: the table, the chanting, that motionless figure. Was it a person? And if so? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. "What do we do?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. My coworker hesitated before replying. "We wait until the crowd thins out, then we leave, quietly. If they catch us trying to run..." She didn't finish her sentence, but the way her voice broke was enough to send the shiver down my spine. Time dragged on, each second feeling heavier than the last. "We're leaving now." The storage closet opened into a small hallway, one we hadn't used before. My coworker led the way, moving with a quiet urgency that told me she knew the layout of this mansion better than she'd let on. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "The staff exit," she replied. "They don't watch it as closely." I didn't question how she knew that. I just followed. We turned a corner, and there it was, a plain metal door at the end of the hallway. Freedom was just steps away. But as we approached, we heard voices behind us, low and angry. "Run," she hissed. We bolted for the door. The shouts grew louder, echoing down the hallway, but I didn't dare look back. My coworker yanked the door open, and we stumbled out into the cold night air. The driveway was deserted now, the sleek cars from earlier gone. The only light came from the moon and a few dimly lit lanterns along the path. My coworker grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the woods lining the property. "Stay low," she said, ducking into the shadows. The forest was eerily quiet. the trees casting long, skeletal shadows in the moonlight. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf made me jump. Behind us, the shouts had grown fainter, but I knew better than to think we were safe. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded in a harsh whisper. She stopped, turning to face me. "You don't want to know. Just trust me. Getting out alive is all that matters." A sudden noise cut me off. It was faint at first, like the distant hum of machinery, but it grew louder, more distinct. A low, rhythmic thrum that seemed to vibrate through the ground. We kept moving, weaving through the trees. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, the cold air biting at my lungs. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the darkness itself was closing in around us. Finally, we reached a clearing where an old, rusted gate stood. Beyond it was a narrow road leading away from the estate. "This is it," she said, fumbling with the latch. But as she worked to open it, the sound of footsteps echoed through the forest, slow, deliberate, and much closer than I'd expected. Figures stood at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the shadows of the trees. I couldn't see their face, but the way they stood, calm, confident, and completely still, was enough to freeze me in place. "Don't move," my coworker whispered. The figures stepped forward, and the faint moonlight revealed a familiar face. It was one of the guards from earlier, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice cold and measured. My coworker finally got the gate open and shoved me through. "Run!" We sprinted down the road, the gravel crunching loudly under our feet. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear the guards' steady footsteps behind us. Up ahead, headlights appeared, a car approaching from the other direction. My coworker waved her arms frantically, shouting for help. The car slowed, and for a brief moment, I saw the glimmer of hope. But as it got closer, I saw the grounds growing dark. The car screeched to a halt, cutting off our path. We skidded to a stop, trapped between the vehicle and the man chasing us from behind. "End of the line," the driver said, stepping out. My coworker grabbed my hand, her grip tight. "We're not going back," she said defiantly. The guards exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Then, without a word, they advanced. The next moments were a blur. My coworker lunged at one of them, giving me just enough time to break free and run. I heard her shouting, her voice desperate, but I didn't stop. I don't know how far I ran, or how long. By the time I finally collapsed, the forest was silent, and I was alone. I never saw her again. The police didn't believe me when I tried to explain what had happened. They dismissed my story as nonsense, claiming there was no evidence of anything unusual at the estate. But I know what I saw, and I know they're still out there, guarding whatever dark secrets lie behind those velvet curtains. And I'll never set foot near that mansion again.